family, um, please do share. Um, Melissa and our interpreters for today, thank you so much for getting us grounded in that way. My name is Chris Cooper, Program Officer here at Sierra Health Foundation at the Center, serving as the day-to-day lead for California funders for Boys and Men of Color. This is the very first of a three-part virtual series on building power and pathways to economic freedom. To be honest, California is home to 10 million immigrants. What I didn't know, it is 23% of the foreign-born population nationwide. Wild. I really don't see a pathway forward for California without immigrant success. Our immigrants are entrepreneurs, yes, employees, teachers, innovators, and so much more. However, there's still unnecessary barriers that get in the way of them being successful. So today is to have a conversation about what those opportunities look like. And there's so much opportunity to redefine what economic success is for many of the immigrants across California. And I want to say California again, and want to emphasize that because California is a leading economy in the world. One of the leading economies, top 5, I believe 4th leading economy in the world. So we have global impact that we can make, and we cannot move forward with our immigrant communities across the state. Thankfully, there's some champions and leaders doing phenomenal work to address these barriers, to be innovative, and create solutions, the dire solutions that we need. Today, I have joining Nourn, co-director at the Asian Prisoner Support Committee, Sasha Feldstein, co-director, Economic Justice Policy Director at the California Immigrant Policy Center, and Eddy Zheng, president and founder of New Breath Foundation, and California State Senator Durazo, serving California's 26th Senate District. We are way too lucky to have you all here today. To get us grounded, and I'm going to start off with you first, Senator. Just like, where do we start? Many of the challenges immigrant families face call for long-term and sustainable solutions. We know that these barriers weren't created overnight, and we know that the solutions aren't going to come overnight. How are you processing, and what are some opportunities that you've been tracking and leading in your office to help us create opportunities for boys and men of color, yes, but then also our immigrant family? And I want to emphasize, when we talk about boys and men of color, we're also talking about immigrant families too. These aren't two separate conversations, right? They're one and the same. So I'll pass it to you to lead us off.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to everyone else here on the panel. It's great to connect every once in a while because we can go off and do our thing, and to talk about this very common issue, I think is really important and is part of building the power that we need. As you said, immigrants are part of the very fabric of California and this country. No matter where they came, some were forced to come here. Some, came because of repression. Some came because of economic needs, that just basic survival. But remember, in the Southwest, especially, immigrants have roots from many, many years who are completely connected with our indigenous peoples. And so it's not like there's a group there of immigrants and here's a group of indigenous. We were all very much connected at the roots, and some have been here 10 generations, some have been here, a year. So that's it. They're not, you can't describe immigrants as one set of people with the same experiences. Some speak a language, another language, and many don't, have been disconnected. My grandchildren, I'm trying to teach them another language from our family, but it's hard to keep that going. I just had the privilege of being in Oaxaca, in the state in Mexico, and visited indigenous communities over there. And the struggle is, how do you keep the traditions, the culture, the language, you know, the love of land and all these things together. So these are part and parcel of the immigrant experience. How do we deal with that here and now in this nation, which set up borders and have these these immigration laws? It's a crazy, crazy world when it comes to immigration laws. But what we're trying to do, I think many of us as legislators, is that immigrants are no different than any other Californians. They contribute, you know, in the billions of dollars when it comes to taxes. They contribute to the economy as a workforce. They contribute as far as a culture, their own vibrant cultures and languages. And that makes California a very, very much more powerful and great nation. So what we're trying to do is say, they're no different. They're doing what everybody else is to build this great state. So let's treat them like everybody else. Let's make sure that they have access to the same things that everybody else has, because we don't want this segregated group of people to be left out. We want them to belong. And so some of the things that I've been mostly involved with is health coverage. You know, health coverage is for all. It's a human right. It should not matter. And luckily, by next year, we will have all undocumented will be covered under our Medi-Cal system. It took several years, but, you know, we got there. And as far as, you know, low income, there'll be no difference based on status. On the other hand, the safety net is not there for everyone. The safety net makes a distinction. Are you undocumented? Are you here as a legal resident? And that's a terrible thing. For example, getting food on our table during the pandemic, anytime, before, during, after the pandemic, is done by overwhelmingly undocumented immigrants in the fields. They're the ones who put that food on our table, and yet they do not have access to unemployment insurance. So that when there's a levee that gets, you know, that breaks and they're flooded, they have nowhere and know how to take care of themselves except maybe get in a food line. And that's not the way it should be. You know, having access to good education, there's no problems there, except sometimes the educational system is not ready to take them in. So I'm trying to do is everything that applies to everybody else should apply to immigrants regardless of their status.
Wonderful, wonderful. Others. And if you have a burning question like me that you forget after hearing such a wonderful response from Senator Durazo and others, please use the Q&A function. It should be center right to your screen. And we will get through the panel discussion and get to your question later. Eddy, Sasha, Nia?
I can just go ahead and add, you know, I think CIPC has been really grateful to partner with Senator Durazo on so many of these issues around health for all and safety net for all. And I think that there is so much that California has done over the years to end some of the exclusions to our safety net, to public benefits and services for immigrant communities. But we can't let California off the hook. There's still so much more that we have to do if we're ever gonna have hopes of reaching full inclusion and equity in our state. And the governor often talks about wanting to create a California for all. And I think it's on all of us to really hold ourselves and each other accountable to that goal. So really a lot of exciting campaigns and coalitions and organizations doing great work, pushing us to not stop until we get full inclusion and equity.
Thank you.
I can go next. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Nia. For me, the work that I do, it's in the intersection of criminal justice and immigrant rights. Just briefly about my background. I am not an immigrant, I'm actually a refugee, right? I was brought here to the US as a baby. My family background of genocide survivors, Southeast Asians. We came here during the Vietnam War, the genocide. So essentially my people, in terms of the conditions that we're in, thinking about economic justice. I mean, trying to get there, it's impossible, right? I mean, we're dealing with poverty, we're dealing with racial disparity, violence like our Black and Brown communities, right? I think for me, being in crisis for 16 years, I have to grapple with how am I going to survive with my conviction, with the stereotype, the stigma, right, as an Asian woman, formerly incarcerated. I think what really supported me in terms of my transition coming home, that I'm actually thriving, is community, right? And I'll talk about more of that. Essentially, like, how do we get there in terms of economic justice when we're talking about all immigrants, not including those with convictions, not including those that don't have legal status, right? They face barriers on top of additional barriers. It's kind of like a perpetual punishment. And I also want to talk about, when we talk about immigrants, there's this stereotypes, the good immigrants versus the bad immigrants, who's more deserving of what. And as Senator Durazo shared, like, we want to be able to, in order to have a thriving California nation, we have to remove those barriers and provide opportunities. And I think I'll talk more about what collective actions can look like. And for us, my organization, APSC, we work at the intersection of supporting APIs in marginalized communities and bringing awareness around the growing numbers of APIs, and really focusing support for those immigrants that are in prison and ICE detention, reentry support for them upon release, even fighting for their freedom, at the same time thinking about what does reentry look like in navigating these systems that they were in, right? That's really challenging. So, and also working on pro-immigrant criminal justice reform policies. And that's a little bit about me and my work. Thank you.
Thank you, Nia. Eddy?
Well, happy new breath, everyone. It's good to share this space with all of you. You know, as an immigrant myself, I experience many of the different barriers and then also the benefit from being an immigrant in this country. I mean, I came when I was 12 years old and settled in Oakland, California. And, you know, the whole idea for my family was to have for my grandparents, my parents wanted me and my siblings to have a better career, better education, and a better life than the one that they had. You know, that's all every immigrant wants, or every citizen, right, wants. And so for me, the importance of having equal access and rights for people who are here, right, whether it's in California or in the United States of America, we have the human rights to have access to all the safety nets so that we can all thrive together, right, in this space. We can't just continue to exploit people's labor and exploit people coming in this country and not to be able to treat them with respect and with dignity. So I definitely, in line with all the thoughts that were shared earlier.
Thank you, Eddy. And I'm going to stay on you because you started to get there a little bit, mentioning the barriers. I mean, you know, we know there's barriers across justice, education, workforce, even entrepreneurship. We know a lot of immigrants and refugees come to this country and they're trying to create their own pathway, right? They're not even, asking any one person for an opportunity. They're trying to create their own opportunity. I'm curious, Eddy, because I've been tracking your work for the past year. Like, why did you start New Breath Foundation? For someone like you, with your background, like, what was it that happened that made you say, I need to start this foundation? And I'm also curious, the partners that you work with that support immigrant communities, what have you been learning from those partners that you funded?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Well, I started New Breath Foundation because I learned through data disaggregation, do a historical engagement with the city government, and then also with the philanthropy and as part of the, nonprofit industry complex. And I was able to learn about the inequities in distribution of resources, right, for the Black and Brown community, who are often just getting $6 out of $100 in the institution of philanthropy. But when it comes to Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiians, we see 20 cents out of $100. And on the issues, when it comes to mass incarceration, deportation that are associated with violence, we get pennies out of that 20 cents. So for me, as someone who is formerly incarcerated, who spent 21 years of my life in the prison system and immigration detention, because I wasn't a citizen of the United States at the time, and I was sort of deported. And through that process, I was able to really understand the importance of creating access, right, for the most marginalized and vulnerable communities, especially for immigrants and refugees. So that's why I started the New Breath Foundation. So it's not only about raising awareness, but really trying to fight for the people who continue to be invisibilized as a result of some of the inequities that's been really like institutionalized in our country, right, in our system. And so part of the things that I learned, well, as an immigrant when I came over, just like many other immigrants who are here for survival or for a better life or whatever that may be, I think for people who didn't speak the language, there's always immediately the language barrier challenges. And then we have the cultural differences and the generation gaps for many of the immigrants who came here in the United States. And what we didn't anticipate was systemic racism, right? For many of the immigrants, no matter what generation they came in from, we didn't know that the systemic racism is what had created and founded this country, right, under white supremacy and patriarchy in that space. So coming in here, there's already trauma as an immigrant to be whether voluntarily leaving the country to fight for a better life or being forced out of the country as a result of the US foreign policy, right, and other European policies that pushes people out. And so I think those exact challenges that we need to address for all immigrant populations and refugee populations, which is the trauma of displacement, the trauma of war, the trauma of poverty, right, and violence. And so when we being here, engaging as a practitioner to do violence prevention, youth empowerment, and then also advocacy for, minimum wage, the increase of minimum wage, fighting for 15, right, as part of the, the movement. And luckily, California was able to pass that, the 15 in last year, along with New York. And so, but that took decades and decades of fighting from people on the grounds. And so New Breath Foundation resources the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community who are impacted by mass incarceration and deportation that's associated with violence. Those are the things that we hear from the grounds, that in order for them to be able to find the human dignity and being treated as human beings and have those type of access, right, to remove the barriers that's already here when they came, right? And so it's how are we able to create equity, not only within our own community, but then with other people of color community. And the last thing I want to just kind of uplift is that, when we talk about the immigrant population and the contribution of the economic power that the immigrant population has contributed, not only in California, but on a national level, as soon as we forget that it was the African Americans and the Native Americans who helped build this country, right, that allowed the pathway for many of the immigrants who helped contribute building in this country, then we will continue to have that narrative of what Nia talked about earlier, the deserving and undeserving, the good immigrants and the bad immigrant narrative. And so that's why it's so important for us to continue to work with our legislators, to continue to work with the people on the front line and the people who are actually suffering from those type of injustice, so we can better be advocates for this whole idea of, as my brother Dorsey Nunn from All of Us None said, it is all of us or none.
Eddy, I know it looks like I'm calm right now, but I'm jumping inside.
I feel you. I felt your energy.
I really am, and I'm reminded of the barrier, but also the opportunity associated with at arrival when folks, our immigrant family come. The first barrier immediately at arrival is systemic racism. At arrival, you already have a system against you. You land. As soon as those airplanes, or however way you got here, by any method of transportation, as soon as you hit these United States, this California specifically, systemic racism is right there. Sasha, Nia, Senator, if we can kind of expand more about, tell us more about the barriers that you've been seeing, but also we're welcome to hear some of the solutions to the barriers that you would recognize.
I can go. I think just to add on to what Eddy put forward, which was so important and powerful, is really just driving home the message that all of these issues are deeply intersectional, that you can't talk about workers' rights without talking about immigrant rights. You can't talk about immigrant rights without talking about addressing systemic racism, that all of these are very much interconnected. And so when we talk about, any issue that you can think of, we have to really make sure that that is steeped in an understanding of the people that we're talking about, and we live very deeply interconnected lives. We have people with multiple statuses, backgrounds, experiences in our families, in our communities, and we can't silo each other, and so we can't silo these issues either. And so I think it's really important, as Nia talking about the intersection of immigration, talking about the intersection of addressing our criminal justice system and our immigration system, that when we're talking about economic justice, we are really talking about how all of these issues intersect. And so I think if anyone walks away with anything, it's to know that we do not, we cannot work on single siloed issues, that we have to talk about these things as they relate to each other.
Thank you. I'll jump in if I can, Chris. And I want to thank Eddy for, the last point he made in terms of Native Americans and African Americans. A couple of decades ago, right after September 11th, there was a massive, basically going after by the government and by others in the country, going after all immigrants because of September 11th. It became just the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous times for immigrant communities, because all were associated with being foreigners and being, in some way responsible for September 11th. Right as a result of that, many of us across the country who are working on immigration, changing the immigration laws and a path to citizenship, organized the Immigrant Workers Freedom Ride. And this was basically to change the mindset in this country that had gone so antagonistic and violent against immigrants. And there are 18 buses that started on the West Coast and went all the way across the country and ended up in New York City with 100,000 people. But the main thing was, and it was led by Congressman Lewis and Reverend James Lawson, and we did it to create that coalition. One, the acknowledgement and the respect for African American movement in this country, because when they fought for civil rights and human rights. It was for everyone. This country changed not only with the rights of African Americans in the movement, but it changed for everybody. Immigration laws changed as a result of the civil rights movement. Social Security, a lot of things in our that we depend on changed massively because of the civil rights movement. So we have to acknowledge that, because frankly, that's what we're supposed to all be about, is how the entire people, you know, move forward together, where everybody has a sense of belonging, everybody is connected. And what we're trying to do is just both on one-on-one, one by one, individually, that transformation because of pain, because of other things that have been they have experienced. But also we want to change the system. We can't just change individuals, can't just change one by one. The whole system has to change. The whole system is completely against people of color. It's against us having all the same access to the same future, and without hate, without with the right to be nurtured. So I really appreciate that, and that's the basis for me. And I just want to just finally, Chris, is I came out of the labor movement. I spent my life and my career, my whole everything about me, it came out of the labor movement. And in the labor movement, we fought for everyone, and no matter what the workplace was. And that is how I got connected with everyone else in the movement, is through labor. When we all have the same right to a great job and a career, and raise our kids, and, you know, be able to coach, you know, little league, to be able to you know, buy a place to live and not have to worry about being on the streets, all that. We all want the same thing for each other.
Thank you, Senator. Nia?
I'll briefly share, and I do agree with Senator and Sasha and what Eddy shared in terms of, in order to create pathways for economic justice, right? We have to really, and the barriers that we're talking about, racial barriers. You can't talk economic justice without leaving out racial barriers, racialized laws, in which Senator Durazo pointed to. I think the IRR that passed in '96 that really harmed, right, folks. It was like really targeting terrorists, but then it impacted, right, immigrants and refugees, and also cultural barriers, as Eddy spoke to, in terms of people of color, when it comes to Asians or Hispanics, or different terms of histories within the US and how we got here. And then the language access to mental health disparities in terms of like people that are survivors of crime, of survivors of gender-based violence. We have to create all that because we come in from different intersections in terms of our experiences. And like, how can you focus on jobs and careers when there's other support that you need as an individual, right? With that. And then I think also like the punitive barriers that this country again was created and designed, the punitive measurements in which laws again are created that are really, again, racialized. So I just wanted to name that. These are the barriers that we really need to break down.
Thank you so much. Wow. Sasha, we're going to transition to you. Sasha, I've only known you for what? I think like 2 months, but you have just such a fighter spirit around this work, and just appreciate everything you're doing. I'm processing, how do we move, I want to acknowledge the difference between economic security and economic freedom. Economic security and building economic power. Like, the security piece kind of covers the basic needs. Like, just give them what they need. But how do we elevate and move from, you know, surviving to thriving? If you can tell our attendees today a little bit about your work, or just in general, how do we move from economic security towards actually having power and being a part of holding power and developing economic power and justice for immigrant communities?
Sure, and thanks for the kind words, Chris. So at CIPC for economic justice, for our team, our vision is for all Californians to be able to meaningfully support themselves and their loved ones and achieve economic mobility on their own terms. And the key words there are really on their own terms. We think that economic justice and building economic power is really to make sure that people have power over the conditions of their lives, over the jobs that they have, the careers that they pursue, the ways that they support themselves, their loved ones, and their communities, the ways that they want to contribute, to not have those decisions made for them, but to actually have people be able to make those decisions for themselves. And so that requires, power over the conditions. That requires being in positions of power. It requires having a say in how investments are made, in what a quality job is and looks like, in how investments are made and public dollars are used, all of that. And it also requires power over the narrative, over how, being able to have control over how we're talked about as workers, not as low-skilled workers, but as highly skilled workers with tremendous experience and talent and things to contribute, and how the issues are framed. And what it really comes down to, the solution to all of that is really investing in organizing. You can't have any of this without organizing, without investing in the ability of people to come together and make change and build power for themselves. And what's tied to that too is also making sure that by investing in organizing, you're also able to invest in accountability. California actually has some strong laws and protections on the books, but when it comes to enforcement and people actually being empowered to stand up for their rights, and creating the conditions where violations can no longer happen, and certainly can't happen without being noticed, is critical. But again, that has to happen through organizing. It has to happen through investing in grassroots communities and worker centers. And so that's really what building power is all about. And then since you talked about justice, I think that's also about making sure that we're going, we've talked a lot about ending exclusions, which I think is incredibly important. We also actually have to go beyond that and address for the harm that has been made and continues to be made. And so that means that we have to have even greater investments to acknowledge and account for the ways that we have set up systems that have stripped wealth and stripped power from our communities, and work to build that back.
I love it. And just real quick, I want to track for our attendees. A lot was said, but positions of power, the power to control the narrative, and the need to invest in organizing and accountability. Awesome, Sasha. Thank you. Eddy?
Speaking of power, I think all the things that we had identified and talking about, the importance of economic power and the access to create that power and have self-determination, is that we for immigrants, we didn't have that mindset of the manifest destiny mindset. We have the mindset of how do we work hard? How can we feed our family? How can we survive? And then how can we contribute to society? Whereas with the manifest destiny mindset, it's about how do we exploit and enslave other people in perpetuity by creating laws and constitutions so they can continue, and the people who believe in manifest destiny, who own slaves, who still benefit from the generational wealth from their slave owners today in the public and private sector, is that how have they continued to exploit their position of power to dehumanize the immigrant population and other people of color communities. So that has to be the nucleus of this understanding when we're talking about the importance of organizing, like what Sasha is doing with her organization and with many of the people here, right, as part of this discussion, is that if we continue to allow those type of policy to impact the people that who actually keep us healthy, to make sure that we have food on the table. But yet, just a few years ago, right, they have on the national level, they pushed public charge. They're saying that the immigrants, are actually parasites. They benefit from, they're trying to create a pathway to become citizens or legalize by using public benefits, have access to healthcare, access to education. And if you do that, then you are burdened to the society, to this country, that you shouldn't become legally, become a green card holder, or you shouldn't become a citizen, because we're seen as a burden. Well, conveniently, that's when they want to push that public charge. But yet, all the contribution or the economic power that's contributed by the immigrants. And so if we weren't for like organizing from, the former CEO or president at Asian Health Services in Oakland, California, Sherry Hirota, with Congressman Honda, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congressman Judy Chu, and many other communities coming together to push back against public charge, then our immigrant populations will continue to live without those type of rights that is afforded to any human beings. And so I think from the position of power and justice, it's never giving to the people who contribute in this country in a way that the immigrant and the people of color have contributed. But yet we have to organize for everything and fight for everything.
Thank you, Eddy. Nia?
I think I just want to touch on, like, for people that have position of power, especially like within institutions that can help, that can make change. I also do think being able to hold those people accountable, right, in ways in which what they state, what they share, that their actions speak louder than their words. I think for me, as an organizer, as an abolitionist, I sometimes tend to speak the truth, and sometimes the truth does not set well with folks, right? But I think it takes time over time in terms of like educating why I think the way they think, or why we do this work, right, to building equality for everyone, and why there should be no exclusion at all. And I do definitely agree in terms of controlling our own narrative, sharing our own truth, right, speaking value to it, because I think especially like when it comes to marginalized communities, like system impacted former incarcerated people, we're always having to defend ourselves, right, based on our convictions, and having to go above and beyond, like, this is what I'm doing, but also at the same time, I'm saying like healing is possible in terms of like, though despite we've done harm, we're able to help create change, right, doing healing work. That's the only way that we're able to transform our community in the world that we want to see it at. And I think that's in terms of the only way towards economic power and justice, including those things that Sasha and Eddy and myself briefly shared.
Thank you for that. I mean, Senator, we're still on just this question around power, moving from surviving to thriving, moving from not only economic security, but to building economic power, and making sure we have this ideal standard of economic justice. How are you tracking? What are some opportunities along those lines? There we go. We got you.
Okay. Let's read the newspaper and watch TV. starting a couple of months ago, there were tens of thousands of young people marching through the UC campuses across the state of California because they wanted to be acknowledged as contributing. And it was, those people who were marching and out on strike, they're pretty diverse. They're pretty diverse as far as gender, as far as ethnicity, LGBTQ, you name it. And that was a pretty diverse group of people who were saying, we need to be acknowledged for the work that we do and treated and made to feel like we belong on these campuses. We contribute. And so we should be acknowledged for that. There's hotel workers, third wave of strikes in the hotels with housekeepers and cooks. There's a potential with UPS saying, some of the part-timers are saying that's not good enough for me. So there is an, Amazon, you name it, all these different companies, and people are saying enough is enough. We don't want just like one by one to be treated better. We know there's something wrong with the system, and it'll take power, real collective power, to gain collective bargaining. And that's where I think the power is in their hands. When I was a union organizer, what gave power to those workers was not me walking in and telling the boss off and yelling at the boss. That wasn't power. It was when the people themselves in the workplace said, you will no longer treat me this way, and I deserve better. And that as a group, collective bargaining, you sit across the table as equals to say, I want better. What can we do? We want more. We want less. You negotiate on the basis of power. It's not done on the basis of some individual who's charismatic. It's on the basis of power. And we have to fix things that are in the system that are wrong. Domestic workers, the reason they don't have the same rights as all other workers across the country when it comes to health and safety is because of slavery. That's where it started. The slavery system said domestic workers should not have the same rights as all other workers. We're still fighting that legacy today with domestic workers. Garment workers were making a big change, made a big change in the system so that it wasn't case by case of wage theft, but rather how do you fix the system and create liability up the chain so that the brand names take responsibility instead of just like, oh, here's a bad guy here, here's a bad guy there. No, it's the system that's bad. It's the system that has to be fixed. Safety net for all, it's the system. Increasing minimum wage. We have I have a bill, SB 525, establish a $25 minimum wage for healthcare workers. Some people say, actually, why not everybody? And that's true. But we've got to build that power, or, while this big group here wins, and this big group here wins, and this big group wins, and then we change the whole system. So that's what makes it both exciting, inspirational for all of us to say, and as a former, kind of still union organizer and a legislator with all of you and our partners, we can build that power.
Wow. I have never heard the connection between collective power and collective bargaining. Sounds like you might need to write a book on that, Senator Durazo. I don't know. Or a t-shirt or something. We got to figure that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're at our final question. We're doing phenomenal on time, and please, attendees, and I'm not gonna call you attendee, I'll call you family. We're all a family here. We're around the table, this virtual table, aka your screen today. If you do have questions shortly after this final question that we have for our panel, we'll start to take those questions. So California Funders for Boys and Men of Color is a statewide network bringing together the leading philanthropic organizations, all working very hard, diligently, to shape a better future for boys and men of color. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we acknowledge that when we talk about boys and men of color, advancing boys and men of color, this includes opportunities for the millions of immigrants across the state. And many of our CEOs and executives and our leaders at these philanthropic organizations acknowledge that this has to be done through collaboration. We have to have a multi-sector approach in how we advance voice and men of color and immigrant communities across the state. Now, I want to start off with you and your story of resilience. I've heard of, and it's just amazing, and just appreciate all the amazing work that you're doing. I wonder if we actually ran into each other at the 5-year celebration event, the New Breath Foundation event, but we'll figure that out. But I wish I actually met you in person. Moving forward, what is the importance of collaboration? What are some ways we can partner to leverage philanthropy and public funds to build thriving opportunities? Yes, for boys and men of color, for immigrant communities too, as well as the population that you're serving at your organization.
Yeah, I feel like this question is also what we've been sharing in terms of people power, right? Collaboration. People power is collaboration. Collaboration is people power. And then I think, like, in regards to any forms of justice, right? Racial justice, economic justice is crucial in creating, like, if you want to make these change happen, diverse group of people coming together in the community, right? And organizations based on their experience and areas of expertise. Also acknowledging, like, how can, also including marginalized people that, based on their lived experience, like Eddy, right? Also, Eddy did share that he's also the co-founder of Asian Prison Support Committee. Eddy's doing the work based on his experience and knowing what's needed in order to help the group of populations, right, that are boys and men of color, immigrants, all immigrants that have experienced systemic racism, right, economic injustice. And I do think in terms of collaboration, that in order to achieve what we want, that we have to center, again, people's backgrounds and differences, and centering, like, their healing, their humanity, support them in ways just like they're deserving, as we've been speaking to for the last half hour, like anyone else, right, based on their skin color, background, and their conviction. Because as Eddy shared, if everyone has access, have their basic needs met, that is the way for them to focus on a pathway, right? Whether it be towards education and creating a career that's sustainable and not just earning decent wages, but then not having to change job after job or having to find 2-3 jobs, right? Just to raise their family, just to in order to have housing, especially if you're living in the Bay Area. I think also in terms of how to support infrastructure in terms of philanthropy, thinking about how can philanthropy invest in grassroots organizations, community-based organizations, invest in New Breath, knowing what populations that needs to be centered, that's actually doing on the ground's work, helping people to, in terms of returning home, right, reentry needs, in terms of mental health support that they need, in terms of how do they get familiar support, get housing and all of that, right? I think, and how to help people with access when they're dealing with mental health crisis and interpersonal violence. Some of these are all need to be addressed, and think about ways that philanthropy can invest in learning from organizations and people that are doing these type of areas of work. I do think, though, also collective work can look like thinking about how can we support immigrants communities. I think sometimes when we think about immigrants that come home from prison, they face additional barriers on top of barriers. And I don't know, in terms of people that are on parole, parole does not offer nearly to anything, very little reentry support. They have to find their own housing. They have to figure out how to get job interviews, navigate, right? And it's really scary. And in terms of reentry support, it's very underserved in terms of organizations. They don't receive that much funding for it, right? I think there's more of it. And for us and the Asian Prison Support Committee, in terms of working towards economic justice, We've had a formerly incarcerated internship program for people that have returned homes and providing support for them to find jobs and secure jobs, and also working on professional leadership development. And then also we provide case management, right, especially for immigrants that needs work permit, IDs and driver license. I think like Sasha can speak more like the barriers that they face right on top of it. And there's not enough support that going around that. That's why APSC, we are reach out in terms of support for those that are returning home. And then also we have support groups for formerly incarcerated men and women and transgender non-binary population, because there's a special need that they have in terms of ongoing support, not just looking for a job, but also in terms of mental health, in terms of how to deal with family reunification, what does it look like now being an adult, been incarcerated 15, 20 years, what does it look like? Because the word's scary. How to deal with technology, how to navigate Gmail and all that stuff, right? Using a cell phone. So I think, and I think in broad strokes, like I believe in leveraging philanthropy of public funds for thriving boys and men of color and all immigrants, and investing in education and skill development. Again, as I shared, mental health and counseling services, entrepreneurship support. So many talented individuals, right, from incarcerated, with so much in terms of, I think APSC at one point was trying to do a food entrepreneurship, and then how to like create community development and infrastructure, working on on youth empowerment, parental family support, policy, advocacy, and research. So those are some of the things like, I think about that my staff, we think about in terms of if grassroots organization or CBO that's working with impacted people and population, if they were provided with unlimited funding, these are all the things that in terms of services in order to help where we need to be at in terms of economic power and justice.
Thank you so much. You gave us a lot. No, I love it. I love it. You gave us a lot. And Sasha and Eddy and Senator, to refresh on the question, just with everything that was said today during this roundtable discussion, what does collaboration look like? Leveraging public funds, leveraging philanthropy, leveraging resources, people, assets. What does collaboration look like? Because we know we must unite to build greater opportunities for this community. Sasha or Eddy?
Oh, Senator, were you going to speak?
Sure, I can say something. Or you want to go first, Sasha?
Sure, I'm happy to. I was just going to say, I think the one thing that philanthropy is in some ways uniquely equipped to do is to bring people from different stakeholders to the table, right, and creating the incentives for that. Let's be real. And so I think that where philanthropy can really support collaboration is helping to provide those opportunities to create spaces where stakeholders have to listen to grassroots community members and worker centers. I'll just give an example. Our former labor secretary, Julie Sue, in California now at the federal level, had a long history of working on workers' rights issues. But many of her staff at the Labor and Workforce Development Agency had never been to a day labor center. And so we were able to actually bring them all down and go to a day labor center and meet directly with workers to hear directly from them about their priorities, the issues that are affecting them, what they want to see in job training and workforce development investments. And so I think it's that type of collaboration and listening opportunities that are so important. Whatever the issue is, creating those spaces to make sure that we are bringing all different stakeholders together, but really also making sure that the people who are directly impacted by policies have a say in that policy and in shaping the policy agenda, whatever the issue may be.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, if I can add something, Chris? Yeah, I think, from the point of view of a legislator and the opportunities that are presented to us sometimes around the budget and even during, the budget when there's competitive grants at stake and all this, is what are the big sort of tranches of funding that we push for, right? I think that's really important to coordinate that. Sometimes it's very specific amounts of money for a specific organization or a specific coalition of organizations. A lot of times it's just a broader description, right? And then organizations compete for their funding. But what's really important to me, and I think gets a lot of attention, is the greater connection, as Sasha was saying, the greater connection to on the ground. Is there organizing on the ground? Are there voices that are telling the stories from experience on the ground? That's very, very impactful. And we've been able to move, funding in our budget based on that. So the more that there's a connection between people organizing one-on-one, people telling their stories, people and organizations coming together, and also touching different issues. For example, we were able to get some language into our budget that said, we're going to address climate, but we're also going to address good job creation at the same time with our dollars. That's about, and the equity as far as access to those jobs is going to be open the doors for everybody and not just some people to get the good paying jobs. So we touched equity in terms of access to jobs. 2, minimum wage jobs are not good enough for our communities. We demand much better than that. So good paying jobs. And 3, that they be addressing climate issues that are far more prevalent in our communities of color and in poor communities than they are in other. My district alone, there's 4 or 5 freeways. Tell me that's not, that's not the kind of danger that that they face every single day because of those freeways and where the decision was made to put them there. So I think it helps when we connect various issues and not just try to do one siloed from the other.
Thank you so much. Finally, Eddy.
Yeah. For me, it's definitely is relationship building. This is who we are, as people, right? We need to really nurture the relationship, and we need to engage all people, right, who occupy a space on this earth, the humankind. And we need to nurture that. And then we need to nurture that trust. I think we go into different spaces because we come in with this mindset of being from a deficit mindset, right? Instead of an asset-based mindset. Because we survive, right? No matter where we came from and how we got here, we survived to this point to be where we at. We didn't do this by ourselves. We didn't just get the privilege. We didn't just get to enjoy what we have, the rights that we have today, because it was just there. People have to fight for them. People have to die for them. So for me, the importance of us, however we identify ourselves in our role, personally and professionally, we have to recognize that our liberation are tied to each other, and we have to mean it. It's not a slogan. And to do that, we have to create spaces for healing. To heal intergenerational traumas, to heal internalized racism, to heal anti-Blackness that's been perpetuated in our daily lives. And those are the healing that we need for us to build on and move forward. When we're talking about collaboration, it has to be at the speed of trust, right? So philanthropy and city government both have a role in this process. For the government, is your representative of the people. So what the allocation of grants has to be looking at the most needed population, most vulnerable populations that you have to create access for, and not to create barriers to have access to those resources, right? We may not have to lobby firms that people get paid millions of dollars to lobby at the Capitol. The people are the representation, right? How we help build California, help build this country. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, philanthropy. There's so much money there. There's so much money in philanthropy. If we're actively trying to create opportunities to address the harms that where those wealth came from, it is about giving those money away. And sometimes that's just one step. But the most important step is to be able to acknowledge that in order for anything to happen, we have to humanize each other and our experiences.
Thank you, Eddy. Wow. Well, this has been amazing. Everyone, please use the Q&A function, center right. It should be on your screen. But let's have some fun real quick before we close out and see if there are any questions. So there is no roundtable without food, all right? Every minute, every second, from all over the world, California has this amazing climate of food. I mean, food recipes coming from everywhere. Shout out to my family in West Africa and Liberia. My family migrated. I was born here in Compton, California, raised in Sacramento, South Sacramento, I should say. Fufu and soup is a dish that I love. Cassava leaf, plava sauce. Oh, just thinking about it right now. I just love pretty much jollof rice. I love just West African food, the Liberian food in my family. So based off of how you all feel right now, let's just say you haven't ate all day. What is on your plate? You're in California, so you got all the food that you possibly can get from all over the world, right? Imagine this state without our immigrant communities bringing all the food here. That is so good. So, Nia, let's start off with you. What do you have on your plate? And we'll do that. See if we have any questions.
I'm actually craving Khmer food, Cambodian food. My staff, they went for lunch. They went to the Cambodian street food restaurant. So I love me a good spicy papaya salad and some fried chicken. And with sticky rice. That's on my plate.
You love it. Sticky rice. Others?
Yeah, I'm a pescatarian for the last 3 years. So a big, a nice steamed fish, green onions, and some light soy sauce. And ginger.
When you say light soy sauce, is that low sodium?
Yeah, this made specific for the fish dish, so it's not too salty.
Okay, you're gonna have to email me that. I want to check that out.
Yeah, I'll take a picture and shoot you the label.
Okay, let's do it. Sasha, Senator?
I just came back, as I mentioned, from Oaxaca. And so one of the things, if you go to a Oaxacan restaurant, and some other Mexican restaurants too, is mole. And there are probably 8 to 10 different kinds of moles made from all the different chilies and spices. And it's just amazing, different colors, different tastes. So go to the Guelaguetza restaurant or Oaxacan restaurant in your area.
Thank you.
It's hot here in Los Angeles, so I'm dreaming about going down to my local fruit cup stand. And yeah, the just fresh cold fruit with the lime and tahini on a hot day. Nothing better.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's everyone. We do not have any questions as far as I am seeing, and you are more than welcome to share questions after this is over. We'll make sure everyone has the recording. But before we go, panel, are there any final remarks? Any final remarks that you want to leave us with?
All the work that we do as legislators, really the most important part is the implementation. It's not just leaving it at the point of writing the law and getting it approved and signed by the governor. It's implementation. And that's where our partnership with all of you and other organizations is. We got to make sure it gets implemented. You know, when we talked about the our records, right? The elimination of our records so that we could go on with life. We need folks on the ground to make sure that that new benefit, that new opportunity gets to everybody, the million people who have should have access to it. So I just want to remind us is legislating and getting budgets is half the job, but the other half depends on you all.
I'd like to thank all of my panelists, Sasha, Eddy, and Senator Durazo, for all your work, your leadership work. I mean, Senator Durazo, I've been girl fanning you for a long time because you've been a champion of many of the immigrant rights and criminal justice reform bills that APSC, along with our ICE out of California coalition, are working on. And I just want to emphasize, like, in terms of, thank you also, Chris, for gathering us in terms of this much needed discussion. Addressing racial equity and economic justice, that they're all tied together. That the only way that we can get there is to end exclusions and really, yes, as advocacy, the people power, right? Policy can only do so much, but it's really contingent upon us, that we are part of this ecosystems. We have power within ourselves to make change happen, right? And we know who to reach out to, who collectively to work with. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me. Thanks to Chris for organizing and to my fellow panelists. It's really an honor. And it's not just an honor to be here with you, but I also think it's a really great example of the kind of collaborations that we need. We need champions in the legislature. We need champions in the funding community. We need champions of amazing grassroots organizations and people who are directly impacted. We need all of us. And so hopefully that this can be a model for future conversations and collaborations, because it really does take everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I always appreciate spaces like this, so we can have, respectful dialogues and looking at solutions. For me, I'm very mindful about the inequities, in the mainstream, society, and then also for the immigrant populations, especially when it comes to women, right? Because I never forget that, this understanding of the women hold up more than half of the sky, right? And we're talking about immigrant population specifically, how many of the women or LGBTQ or gender nonconforming folks are working in sectors to create the opportunity for a man or for other, folks to just live and to thrive and to be successful. But yet the treatment, the inequality, right, in the way that we treat our women and gender non-conforming folks has continued to be pushed down from the highest court of this land. So I don't want to, for a minute, forget that, right? And so I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to continue to learn. When we talk about collaboration, we're talking about the connection we have with city government and philanthropy in the field, is that sometimes, you know, we have to take power, right? Because it wasn't given to us. And so the last thing I want to share is that we have to prioritize healing so we can better position ourselves to continue to collaborate and organize and fight. So thank you, Chris, for inviting all of us to share this space.
Thank you all. This panel, this discussion was so refreshing for me personally. Also, just thank you so much on behalf of Sierra Health Foundation, the Center, and California Funders for Boys and Men of Color. We're not going to stop here. August 29th, around the same time, believe at the same time, and believe on a Tuesday, we will convene another panel around policy when implementation. We know that advocacy does not stop when a bill is passed into law, and that part of this movement, this power building movement, is to be at the implementation table. So thank you so much. This was a very first part of a 3-part virtual series on building power and economic pathways to freedom. I don't see any questions, so I will go ahead and let you all go. Thank you for everyone who decided to stick around, even if you had a 2 p.m. PT or 5 p.m. ET meeting. Let's stay connected. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.